Let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating historical and theological analysis from the Hussein Center. We're going to look closely at the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the Islamic legal system. Basically, we want to understand exactly how this source structures its arguments around what it considers to be living proofs of prophethood. So, let's get into it. To kick things off, the analysis asks us to just rely on our basic understanding of human nature. Seriously, ask yourself, if someone were falsely claiming supreme divine authority, what kind of life would you expect them to pursue? You'd probably expect a pretty lavish lifestyle, right?
To explore this, we'll follow the source's roadmap through 6 key areas. 1. The core argument. 2. Expectation versus reality. 3. Humility and leadership. 4. The perfection of Sharia. 5. Universal rights and mercy. And finally, 6. The ultimate takeaway.
All right, starting with Section 1, the core argument. Moving right along to Section 2, expectation versus reality. Historically speaking, we usually expect a false claimant to aggressively seek wealth, power, and glory. I mean, that's just par for the course, right? Yet, the Hussein Center points out this absolutely stark historical contrast. The historical accounts describe a leader who lived an incredibly humble lifestyle. We're talking about a guy who mended his own shoes, milked his own sheep, and patched his own clothes. It really forces us to reconcile this ground-level reality with the typical behavior you'd expect from a powerful conqueror.
To emphasize this extreme simplicity, historians note a pretty striking detail. Sometimes, entire months would pass without a fire even being lit in his house for cooking. Think about that for a second. Despite holding absolute sway over a rapidly growing community, he deliberately chose a life of foundational simplicity, often subsisting on literally just dates and water.
And the crucial point in this analysis is found at the very end of his life. At the time of his death, despite being the unquestioned leader of an entire region, his armor was pawned to a Jewish merchant for a mere 30 measures of barley. 30 measures? Is that the ultimate legacy of someone driven by self-enrichment? The analysis argues that this completely and totally contradicts that narrative. Okay, Section 3, humility in leadership. This humility is also analyzed through the text of the Quran itself. Think about human psychology for a minute. If a false prophet authored a religious text to build a personal empire, they'd heavily center themselves, right? It's just human nature. Yet, looking at the stats, Moses is mentioned 136 times. Abraham gets 69 mentions, while Muhammad's own name appears only 4 times. It raises a massive question. Why on earth would a fabricator intentionally obscure their own glory?
And this argument extends to his reaction during intense personal crises, too. For instance, when faced with a devastating slander against his wife, he didn't instantly fabricate verses to silence the controversy, which would have been the easy way out. Instead, accounts show he patiently waited for revelation. Or consider this, when his infant son died, a solar eclipse happened to occur on that exact same day. His followers immediately assumed the universe was mourning his loss. Now, a false prophet would easily capitalize on this mythos, right? It's free PR. Instead, he firmly rejected the claim, teaching his followers that the sun and moon absolutely do not eclipse for the death of any mortal.
Let's transition over to Section 4, the perfection of Sharia. Here, the analysis pivots to the sheer scope of the Islamic legal framework. The big question the source poses is, how could an unlettered man in 7th century Arabia produce such a vast, intricate system? Sharia attempts to perfectly balance spiritual and material needs, establishing ethical economic principles that economists actually still study today. But what's truly fascinating here is the massive range of this law. It scales all the way from governing grand international relations and warfare right down to the simple, dignified manner in which a person should put on their shoes. It covers the whole shebang. Which brings us to Section 5, universal rights and mercy.
The Hussein Center highlights several principles within this framework that they view as totally revolutionary for 7th century Arabia. For example, the system declared absolute racial equality centuries before modern civil rights movements even existed. It established that human beings are equal regardless of skin color, and made personal character or piety the sole measure of nobility.
We also see the early codification of fundamental rights for women, officially securing their right to inheritance, education, and independent property ownership. To really grasp the gravity of this argument, you have to put yourself in that historical context. These legal rights were codified during an era when the rest of the world was still actively debating a woman's fundamental status in society. It was a real game changer. Now, perhaps most surprisingly, the system outlines unparalleled mercy towards animals.
It strictly prohibits their use as mere targets for sport. The law is so meticulous, in fact, that it even mandates rules for beekeepers. It ensures that bees retain enough of their own honey to guarantee their survival over the winter. The comparative argument the source is making here is pretty clear. If the legal code meticulously protects the survival of literal insects, just imagine its intended standard of care for human beings.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the ultimate takeaway.
Summarizing this entire perspective, the source quotes scholars who state that even if there were literally no other proof, the sheer perfection and comprehensive nature of this legal system alone would be sufficient. The Hassin Center frames these two pillars, a remarkably simple personal life, combined with the delivery of a massive, mathematically complex law, as living historical proofs that continue to guide millions of people today.
So, we leave you with this final thought. How does balancing the documented history of extreme personal humility with the creation of a vast, enduring societal framework challenge our standard narratives of historical leadership? It is a stark contrast, for sure, and one that forces us to completely reevaluate what we expect from those who shape human history. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.